So John McCransky is a professor of Buddhism and comparative theology at Boston College, and he teaches meditations of innate compassion and wisdom to students from Buddhism and other faiths, as well as those in caring professions. And John was ordained as a Tibetan Buddhist Lama in the year 2000. Hi, John. Welcome.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you.
Lovely to have you. And Paul. So Paul Condon is an associate professor of psychology at Southern Oregon University and a research fellow at the Mind and Life Institute. And his extensive work on compassion has been featured in leading psychology journals and major publications. And he also teaches Tibetan Buddhist meditation to a diverse range of practitioners. Hello, Paul. Welcome.
Hi,
Lovely to
Rachel.
see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. And so together, John and Paul developed the Sustainable Compassion Training Model to bring compassion and wisdom to a wider audience. And today they're going to help us understand the roots of compassion and also share some practical ways that we can develop and, importantly, sustain it and also use it in our lives. So please join me in giving them a very warm welcome, and I'll hand over to John and Paul.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. I guess I'll go first. So thanks so much for the introductions and welcome everybody. It's great to see you all here. And there's this new book that Paul and I just published. It just came out a couple of days ago from Shambhala Publications. It's called How Compassion Works, a Step-by-Step Guide. And in this book, we draw both pretty deeply on principles of Buddhism, especially coming from certain Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And we also draw from some principles of modern psychology to introduce forms of meditation adapted from Tibetan Buddhism, informed by some of these areas of modern psychology to help us catch on to those meditations. And that's what I'll talk about a little bit. First, I'll give some of the background from Tibetan Buddhism that we draw on for this, and I'll lead a meditation, and then Paul will discuss a little bit about principles of psychology that correlate with all this. So very, very briefly, though, not too long. So let me just back up a little bit and give some background behind the book and behind what we've been calling sustainable compassion training that the book is introducing. From a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, all of us possess a tremendous positive innate potential in the very ground of our experience, which many Buddhists would call our Buddha nature, which is the basic space of our being, undivided from vast capacities of awareness, warmth, unconditional love, compassion, and wisdom. And these innate capacities are always available below our surface consciousness, in the ground of our experience, but are often hidden by our limiting habits of thought and reaction. This is basic background from Tibetan Buddhism that we draw on. So in this book and in the sustainable compassion approach that we take, we're exploring ways derived from Tibetan Buddhism to become increasingly receptive and transparent to the unconditional qualities of this innate awakened nature through sense experience, through relational fields of loving connection, and by settling directly into the source of these positive qualities in the depth of our awareness. And then from that depth, we can learn to sense others more in their depth and to hold them in the same unconditional loving qualities. So what I just mentioned involves three modes of meditation practice that we derived from Tibetan Buddhism, but actually these fundamental patterns of meditation practice, I think I discern them in many other spiritual traditions, but the specifics of what I'll do is coming from Tibetan Buddhism. So what are these three modes of meditation practice that are at the core of the book? We call them the receptive mode, the deepening mode, and the inclusive mode. So in the receptive mode, we bring to mind a relational field of loving connection, what could be called a field of care or a field of refuge. And that helps us access unconditional qualities of love and compassion and wisdom from the depth of our awareness. Really, it involves bringing to mind someone or some field of beings that we experience as embodying powers of warmth, love, care, acceptance, wisdom. And then we experience ourselves as held in that field of care or field of refuge. And that begins to evoke our own inner capacities of love, compassion, and wisdom from the depth of our awareness. So that's the receptive mode, becoming receptive to those qualities from our own depth, actually, with the help of that field of care. In the deepening mode, we let those loving qualities help the mind to settle into their source in the very ground of our experience, which is experienced as a pervasive openness, lucidity, and warmth. And that's what many Buddhists would call our Buddha nature, the source of those unconditional loving qualities. Then, in the inclusive mode, we come from that depth of our being to know and sense others in their depth, their profound dignity and positive capacity, and to include them in the same unconditional qualities of openness and warmth and compassion. So in this book, we adapt this pattern of practice from Tibetan Buddhism with some assistance from modern psychology to make it accessible both for Buddhist practitioners and for people of all other backgrounds and faiths who are seeking an accessible way to cultivate more unconditional and inclusive love and wisdom. Or another way to summarize these three modes of practice in a nutshell: to experience ourselves and our world as held in the love and compassion and wisdom of our field of care, which can be called outer refuge, helps us settle into the source of those qualities, the basic space and pure awareness and warmth of our deep nature, which is inner refuge, from which to recognize others in their deep nature and to hold them in unconditional warmth and compassion and wisdom. And that's the pattern of practice we engage in the book. So what I'll do now is very kind of quickly introduce the first mode of practice, which is what we can take some time for a moment, and that's the receptive mode. And so the basic idea is this: when someone embodies the positive qualities of their underlying innate awakened nature, what Buddhists would call their Buddha nature, when someone embodies the positive qualities of their innate nature, if we are receptive to the power of their presence with those qualities, it can evoke our corresponding capacity to experience those qualities and to begin to embody them. So Tibetan Buddhist practitioners often bring to mind the Buddha or a field of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or lineage teachers as an enlightened field of refuge, a field of unconditional care and wisdom. So they experience themselves and their whole world as held in the Buddha's all-pervasive love, compassion, and wisdom, which brings out their own corresponding capacities of appreciation and gratitude and warmth and compassion and wisdom. And many of you may recognize that in other contemplative traditions, not just Buddhism, there's an analogous pattern of practice, that is, to experience oneself as being held in the love, compassion, and wisdom of the divine, of saints, of prophets, or of spiritual ancestors. So Tibetans also bring to mind often the loving kindness of their mothers or other loving figures in their lives, and let that help evoke their corresponding capacities of warmth, appreciation, and love, which they then extend to all other beings as energies of love and compassion. So this pattern of practice from Tibetan Buddhism and also other spiritual traditions mirrors a pattern of human emotional development that's described in developmental psychology under the rubric of what's called attachment theory. That is, in essence, in the course of our lives, human beings need to experience what it's like to be seen and held in love and care in order to mature into persons who can see and hold others in love and care. And that's the basic pattern of the sustainable compassion training. So I'm going to go ahead very briefly, just lead a really brief meditation in what we've called the receptive mode. I'll just guide it in one form that it can take. Is everybody up for that? Should we do that? Just be for a few minutes, okay? So let's just sort of settle into our seats, kind of sitting in a relaxed way. Back could be comfortably straight. Eyes could be open, gazing downward, or closed if you prefer. And now just come down from the thinking mind into the body. Just letting the body draw the mind more and more into oneness with it by just relaxing into the body. Good. And try now to recall just one simple caring moment with another person or a pet that makes you happy to recall or feels heartwarming or uplifting to recall. Just try to recall one simple caring moment with another person or a pet that makes you happy to recall or feels heartwarming to bring to mind. Really try to do that. One simple caring moment. A moment when someone was radiating warmth and kindness to you, or just happy to be with you, or really listening, or seeing you deeply, or a moment of just snuggling with a child or a pet, perhaps. But try to recall just one such moment. Can everybody do that? Just one moment. And now, please bring this to mind not just as a memory from the past, but as happening right now. Bring this to mind not just as a memory, but as if it's happening right now. Try to re-inhabit it. You are in that moment now. That means you are being seen and held in deep care, acceptance, warmth, and compassion beyond all judgments. Try to sense or imagine that this is really happening. This is a moment that you know. Be in it now. You are being seen and held in deep care, acceptance, warmth, and compassion beyond all judgments. Feel that. Just relax into this experience. Steeping in its loving energies, feeling its tender qualities, and letting them infuse your whole being and your whole world. Let the loving energies and tender qualities within this moment infuse your whole being and your whole world. Your whole body, your whole mind, and your whole world. Every part of you and your world loved in its very being. Every part of you and your world loved in its very being. And as thoughts and feelings or reactions arise, let them all be embraced in the warmth and acceptance of this loving, healing environment. As thoughts and feelings arise, let them all be embraced in the warmth and total acceptance of this loving environment. thereby letting the thoughts and feelings just find their own place in their own time, to metabolize themselves in their own way by letting them all be. Okay, good. And you can let the atmosphere of that meditation, however it was for you, just continue to resonate into what we do now. That was an example of one way of beginning to meditate within the what we call the receptive mode, bringing to mind a field of care in the form of one simple caring moment and re-inhabiting that moment as if it's happening now, in order to allow it to begin to evoke really unconditional qualities of warmth, acceptance, love, compassion, discernment from the very ground of our experience. So that's one example of a kind of receptive mode meditation with a field of care. And I'll pass it on now to Paul, and he'll have some comments also correlating what I just said and what we just did with some areas of modern psychology that can help inform it. Paul?
Okay, now we are on. Thank you. Thanks, John, for the practice. Um, so I'm going to say some things about different areas of psychology that relate to the practice and the ideas that John introduced just now. And I want to say something sort of big picture about this before I get into some specifics. What John and I have been doing in this project we've been working on for several years is not an attempt to justify or rationalize engaging with meditations or validate the meditations, but rather it's something I think that's more unique and more powerful in that we are noticing ways in which different theories and ideas that come out of scientific psychology help to point out different aspects of the meditative experience. And in that way, the scientific theories are giving us some vocabulary and understandings that help us to catch on to the meditation more and more and can deepen in the meditation. And so in that way, it's a support for the experience of the practice. What we're doing in the meditation that John just led is training our attention on qualities of love and care and warmth. We're learning to familiarize with those felt qualities more and more. And in the same way, I think these psychology principles help to train our attention in the same way. So the first thing I'd like to speak to is the concept of receptivity that John talked about, that we're learning to become receptive to qualities of care. And as we learned already from attachment theory and different parts of developmental and evolutionary psychology, we have an innate capacity or natural capacity for compassion. From an evolutionary perspective, this is something that is quite distinct or unique about humans. There's one perspective that human infants are uniquely prepared to solicit care from multiple caregivers. So not just one caregiver, but rather a range of people. Infants can quickly make connections and solicit care from multiple adults. And it's thought that this is one of our primary motivations as infants, is to solicit attention and care. So in other words, it's our natural state to be receptive to care. It's our natural state to solicit care from many people. So in this way, the caring moment practice is simply tapping into something that we are designed to do as infants from day one. The second point I'd like to speak to comes from a perspective called grounded cognition. And the grounded cognition point shows that meditation that we just did is making use of something that we do all the time. That is, our mind is visualizing and embodying experiences. So when we recall a memory from any point in our life, it's simulated or grounded in multiple systems throughout the brain. This includes the motor system for movement, sensory systems, affective, perceptual, cognitive, and so forth. So this is just a basic way that the brain works. So if you just imagine for a moment holding a grape in your hand versus holding a hammer. So you just think about how that might feel to hold a grape in your fingers versus holding a hammer. It requires a different kind of engagement in different muscles and different strength of the grip. Just by thinking about those two different examples, the brain is engaging the motor system differentially. This has been shown in neuroimaging studies. So again, just in any time that we think about something, we aren't just coming up with a kind of abstract definitional understanding, but the brain and the body are simulating the experience of it. So during the field of care practice, we are envisioning and simulating a felt sense of security by feeling into the caring moment or spiritual field as if it's happening now, not just a distant memory. And the brain and body feel that. It's not a hard thing to do. It's something we do all the time. And we notice the felt qualities of care, love, warmth, inner safety, peace, and so forth that come with that moment or field of connection. So these practices are a way of re-inhabiting experiences of care that we've already felt at some time in our life. It's not just an intellectual exercise or way of believing in something. Helps us to connect with a deeply embodied experience of relationality by reenacting the relevant systems within the brain. So in sum, our body is treating the memory in a way that is similar to when it occurred before. So we're drawing on experiences that have already been imprinted into our being and reactivating them. The third principle, I've got just two more, number 3 and 4. The third principle is about the potential to feel security or safety. So as John mentioned, this is informed by attachment theory that suggests that one of the most important things is a relationship in which we feel a sense of warmth and care. And all of us have received care for better or worse throughout our life. And the important thing about attachment theory, though, is it's not deterministic. It's not that if we haven't received care that we're locked into a kind of what's called insecure way of being. But what attachment theorists and social psychologists have shown is that this way of priming security, as we do in the field of care practice, even for just a brief moment, regardless of our backgrounds and our life history, it can promote a feeling of safety and security. It can promote a sense of patience and faster recovery from experiences of stress or difficult emotion. Research has also shown that it can increase our ability to engage in empathy and compassion for others. It can also increase our ability to be comfortable with uncertainty, to tolerate uncertainty. And this brings me to the final point that I'd like to speak to, which is how the field of care practice provides a basis for more inclusive compassion. A very common, sort of all-pervasive barrier to compassion are different kinds of stigmas, or what John and I call reductive impressions of self and others, a sort of limiting way of seeing others through different kinds of conceptual mediums or representations, cognitive constructions that hone in on a particular feature of another being, like that smart or that attractive, sort of like stereotypes in the mind that pop up and restrict our ability to sense another person in their deeper humanity. So this is an all-pervasive barrier to more inclusive compassion, but the research has shown this attachment priming technique in the field of care style of practice can help increase a sense of safety and security that can ironically help us to become less attached to our thoughts and emotions and narratives, to our common kinds of worldviews and defenses. So through this sense of secure attachment, we are ironically less attached to our images and perspectives, which can then increase our capacity for compassion and to engage in the world with more creativity and more flexibility and more energy. So through feelings of safety within this sense of secure base, attachment in the psychological sense, we can become ironically less attached in a Buddhist sense. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Paul and John, for that very clear introduction to your practices. What feels most powerful to me as I listen is the invitation for us to receive care, and specifically not based on anything that we've done, to necessarily deserve that, or because we're suffering. Obviously, it does include moments of suffering, but it's unconditional. And I think that that's quite a new experience for a lot of us. We're not necessarily used to letting in or recognizing that actually we are worthy of that sense of care, and also that it's coming from within. So that's what I've found really personally striking to discover. So thank you. I was just reflecting on, in terms of, you mentioned the attachment theory being addressed in your model, and the importance of early experiences of care in our capacity to then be compassionate to others. So I was just wondering, if people are struggling to kind of recall memories of care due to having complicated or traumatic histories, what can they do if maybe they sit down to kind of receive this field of care, but actually they're finding that it's quite difficult, they're not used to to receiving it, or they have no, or feel like they have no resource to draw upon?
Well, actually, what we've noticed is it's not just modern developmental psychology theory of attachment that draws on this fundamental approach, that is, learning how to become receptive to powers of unconditional love, compassion, and wisdom in a way in which we're experiencing ourself and our world as held in those powers as if by God or by saints or prophets, or in Buddhism, it would be by the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, lineage teachers, that to experience that you and your whole world are held in that actually is evoking our innate underlying capacity to experience and generate those same qualities. So like outer refuge evokes a profound inner refuge. And that actually is like the structure of attachment theory built into spiritual religious traditions. You begin with the experience that you are held in love, care, compassion, wisdom, and that empowers you to become more and more a human being who shares in that great holding of others. That's like attachment theory. So in a sense, the pattern of attachment theory is built right into spiritual traditions. And it doesn't require that we have had a perfect childhood or anywhere near a perfect childhood. In fact, as we enter into this process, we begin to realize more and more that there have been many little moments of caring connection that we have either been part of or even witnessed. I'll tell you, it's hot these days where I'm living in the upper East Coast. And I just go to the shopping mall because it's cool to cool off. And while I'm there cooling off, I just see a parent, maybe a father, and his little daughter reaches up to hold his hand as they go down the hall. And I can feel like an uplifting feeling just to witness that. And naturally to take joy in that. How wonderful. Or walking through the park and seeing children calling to their puppy and the puppy running across the field to them, wagging its tail. It's uplifting to even witness it, let alone be part of it myself. It's like we are part of it, actually, if we pay enough attention. So actually, there have been zillions of little caring moments. We haven't been trained to notice how many there are. And we don't have to have had a perfect childhood. And there are other ways of entering the receptive mode, as I alluded to at the start of this response. Well, in spiritual traditions, we bring to mind Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, teachers, mentors, and we can also bring to mind benefactors, figures in our life, and also that we even have not even personally met, like the Dalai Lama, like Archbishop Tutu, like so many figures that we find inspiring and uplifting and that have really inspired our lives. We can bring one of them to mind. We don't have to have had a perfect childhood. All we need is a strong enough interest in accessing this possibility that we could actually have a power for unconditional love and compassion and wisdom in us that can be evoked. If we have a strong enough interest in that, from what I've seen over the last 25 years, the vast majority of people can find their way to it. But we might just help them with finding the field of care that's appropriate for them and really opens it up for them. But everyone can find one eventually.
Thanks, John. I want to add one other thing, too, that I've found helpful teaching these practices in a university setting with college students, where some of those kinds of questions come up about, finding an option that would work, or struggling with difficulties of finding something, or having doubts about being able to do the practice. And in those settings, and I think too in retreat settings where John and I have both explored doing all this as well, the sense of doing the practice in a social environment with others who are also engaging in the practice and sharing experience is another way of establishing that sense of a supportive social space that can contribute to a sense of a secure base or safety. And though when students are kind of sharing ideas for how to engage the practice,
that then helps point out possibilities and ideas that others could connect with. Like they say, oh, I hadn't thought about that, but that works for me too. Like maybe thinking of a song that they liked from when they were in high school, or engaging in a hobby or a sport with others are examples that students of mine often share. So this kind of social setting for sharing and engaging in the practice together is another way of exploring and supporting it.
Thank you both. That's very brings a lot of hope. I think that there are so many ways that we can access this field of care, and personally I've found that the more I practice, the more I notice little moments, like you said, John, just in the supermarket, or being in the park watching people with their dogs playing. So I think that's really motivating, that actually where regardless of the upbringing we've had, we all have access to resources. It's about kind of consciously paying attention. So thank you. Why do you think it is that we kind of maybe habitually undervalue or kind of miss these moments of care that are actually available?
Well, I'll give one kind of response, and then part of the reason I enjoy working with Paul is because he'll give some kind of complementary response. It's kind of amazing. I feel sometimes like we're two sides of the brain, although we also profoundly intersect. But I'm going to draw from Buddhism because that's really my special area. So, and I'm drawing on it for here, but again, to reiterate, the patterns I'm drawing from Buddhism, and particularly Tibetan Buddhism, I think are largely shared across spiritual traditions. So I was actually teaching within a department of theology for 30 years and came into a lot of conversation with people in Christian and Hindu and Jewish and Muslim traditions and Native American traditions and more. And this same fundamental pattern, I think, is there. Receptive mode, letting that empower you in a way that deepens into the source of the qualities you're receiving more and more. And then from that depth, really sensing others more at their depth rather than superficial reaction. So that pattern's pretty widespread. And the problem, though, again, I'll come from a Buddhist point of view for a moment, is we've been looking for qualities of stable well-being. And we've been looking for ways to establish a very grounded, stable well-being or happiness or joy of being in the wrong places. That's the fundamental problem. In fact, stable well-being is found by accessing and learning to embody more and more fully powers of literally unconditional care, warmth, acceptance, love, compassion, and the wisdom that supports them, and other qualities associated with them, like deep groundedness, equanimity, deeper seeing, deeper sensing, deeper listening. And the source of those qualities, from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, is the very ground of our experience, the very ground of our being, the depth of our being. Those qualities are really not actually available anywhere else. But we keep looking for them out in the world, trying to get situations and other beings and people to behave in just the right ways so we can temporarily experience nice things with them. If they behave just the right way and say just the right things and the whole situation is just right, then maybe I can experience some happiness. But deep down we know we can never establish any kind of lasting well-being that way, because all of it's completely ungrounded, impermanent, conditioned. No lasting well-being can be found there. It can only be found in the very depth of our being with access to these unconditional qualities. Now, there's just one other thing that has to be said about that, though. So that's really responding to your question. That's why we're so caught up in trying to get the external world to be the perfect way for us, rather than much more receptive to qualities from the depth of our being. But there's a subtle problem around all this that needs to be raised, also from a Buddhist point of view, and that is the part of the reason why we think we can get these qualities, or really only get these qualities of warmth and comfort and well-being, by getting others and our situations in our world lined up just the right way. Part of the reason we think that is because our access to these qualities, as with the field of care meditation that we led, has been associated with other people. Like when I'm very, very upset as a child or infant, when I was very upset, my mother would come to me with her loving presence and comfort me. And then I would feel warmth and comfort and well. And of course, as an infant, it really looks and feels to me like my mother is giving me the experiential qualities of warmth and comfort and well-being, as if she is inserting those qualities into me. But actually, and this is coming from a Buddhist point of view, she never did. By being present to me in a loving way, she evoked those capacities from my own awareness. Now, that's not something an infant could ever understand. But from the time that we were infants, we continue to believe that our capacities and the qualities we experience of warmth and comfort and well-being are coming from our external world, but they never were. But importantly, our relationships with others have empowered us to access these qualities from the depth of our awareness. They have. When they're present to us in loving ways and wise ways, that evokes our capacity to experience similar qualities and to begin to learn to embody them. So we are actually interdependent, but not in the way that we've thought since the time we were infants, as if they can give us these qualities. That's like a fuller response to your question, initial response. Is that okay? Sort of clear enough?
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like there's like a bi-directional relationship with the field of care, and we've maybe just been believed all our lives that it must come from outside, but actually the more we kind of sort of sense it from a non-conditional place within, the more able we are to actually receive it and then also give it.
So that's exactly right. And that just this one other piece with that is when we give the instruction of a field of care meditation, which by the way can take these various forms, caring moment is just one form that we did. When we give the instruction, we always say, we bring up this point that, when someone has been present to you in a loving, caring, warm, discerning way, seeing the good in you, let's say, that's evoking your experience, but it's not giving you your experience. So when we bring the field of care to mind, like the caring moment, they're not giving us the qualities that we now experience. They're helping to evoke them from within our own awareness. And that's critical to know that, because once we start to experience those qualities, the instruction is to really settle into them, not keep thinking about your relationships and whether these people are perfect enough or whether that caring moment lasted long enough. It doesn't matter. The person or being in that caring moment evoked qualities from your ground of awareness. Now you've got these qualities. No excuses. Steep in them. You've got them. They're yours. Like that. No one gave them to you. But these people or beings helped evoke them. So in that sense, they did serve something profoundly good.
Wow, powerful.
Rachel, I'll add, so your question, I'm forgetting exactly how you phrased it. You were asking about sort of what prevents us from being able to notice experiences of care. And so in addition to all the things that John just described, there's another perspective or point of view within psychology that our goals shape our attention. So if we have a goal to meet a particular agenda or something within a meeting, our mind is sort of organizing our perceptions and experience and also our memories of the experience around that goal. It's kind of the linchpin of our experience. This is a basic idea from cognitive science about the way the mind organizes information. And there's a very famous study that many people might be aware of on the call called the Invisible Gorilla study. So in this study, the researchers were studying something called selective attention, which is when we have a goal, we only notice things in our environment that are related to that goal. And they showed that participants were trying to track the number of times a basketball would be passed between players on a certain team. But what happened in the middle of the video is that a mascot wearing a gorilla mascot outfit walked into the middle of the basketball court. The majority of people did not notice the gorilla. It's called the invisible gorilla study. So I think this is an interesting kind of example of what's going on with these moments of care that we don't notice. Because our mind, because of our conditioning and the sort of values of the cultural context that we're educated in and that we grow up in, our mind is not trained to value or pay attention to these simple moments of care, like the example of the young daughter reaching up to grab the father's hand. Like, we wouldn't think of that as something that's worth paying attention to. But this meditation is helping us to retrain our attention so as to capture and notice those things in our environment as they're happening more, and also recovering examples from our own life and memories that we maybe didn't fully participate in, but now through the meditation we can learn to participate in more fully. So it's a sort of, by shifting our goals, we can shift our attention, and then our memories will shift, and we'll experience more of these caring qualities as a result.
Wow, the power of intention, that's what comes to mind, just the power of intention to take in and notice. And like you said, sort of valuing actually moments of care. We are very goal focused, aren't we? And, all about productivity and efficiency. And actually, we've got all these gems around us waiting to be taken in that can have a remarkable impact on our physiology and psychology. So, wow, thank you. Before we open up to the audience, so if you do have any questions, get ready. I was just wondering, in terms of the receptive mode of the 3 parts of the model, how does the receptive mode address the sort of cause of conflict or defensiveness, in terms of interpersonal conflict that may kind of bring up feelings of being criticized and the need to defend ourselves? How does the receptive mode kind of address the underlying cause of those, which obviously can promote a lot of conflict in the world? Oh, you've muted yourself, John.
Good question. Thanks. That actually would highlight a part of the kind of receptive meditation that I just led earlier, the field of care with a caring moment. That's one kind. But whatever kind of field of care meditation we use, in that case it was caring moment, there comes a point where the instruction said, notice whatever thoughts, feelings, reactions are now coming up. So there we are, first noticing what loving qualities have been evoked by bringing to mind that caring moment or that field of care. Notice it and steep in those qualities. And you are now being seen, kind of in depth. You're being seen and held in absolute warmth, acceptance, care, compassion, beyond all judgments, totally. Just explore learning to accept that deeply. Then the instruction came, notice various thoughts, feelings, reactions that come up, and typically there will be. In fact, reactions often may come up from parts of our mind, the various senses of self and reactions associated with them, that feel uncomfortable becoming this vulnerable to loving qualities. because the instruction is really become more and more and more receptive, more and more vulnerable to these qualities. Simply steep in them, accept them more and more deeply. So there are parts of us that aren't yet ready to trust all that, understandably. So that's why the instruction came. When you notice thoughts, feelings, reactions coming up, various senses of self reacting, let them also be included. As you notice them, let them be just naturally, spontaneously embraced in these same loving qualities. So they're all welcome here. Totally. Every reaction, totally welcome the moment it arises. And in that way, we give every thought, feeling, and reaction all the space it needs to find its own place in its own time. So we become kind of a healing environment. The field of care is helping us become like a compassionate, healing environment for all of those reactions in which they can begin to deeply heal. It's a direction of learning. It doesn't just happen in one 5-minute session, but that's a profound direction. And as we learn to become a more and more profoundly and unconditional healing environment for all of our own feelings and reactions, we now are starting to become that for others, their feelings and reactions. And that's beginning to address the question you raised. Well, how is it that the receptive mode provides a kind of a foundation for being present in our world, and a world in which there's much conflict and in which we each tend to get pulled into conflict? How does it help us make us present in kind of a radically different way, a much more healing way? But we cannot be that kind of a healing presence for others unless we are learning how to be that for every part of ourselves. And that's what the receptive mode helps us begin to learn to do. Is that sort of responding to your question? That's a start.
Yeah, that does. Thank you. And it tracks with my experience as I've been exploring your work. That as I kind of practice feeling my feelings and allowing them to kind of, as you say, like take up space, giving them all the space they need. When I'm in a situation where I'm aware of someone in suffering, or a group in suffering, or even a conflict that I'm having with others, and those natural negative, difficult feelings arise, I'm noticing that my capacity or my willingness to feel those is increasing. Yeah. Paul, did you want to add anything before I add another question?
Yeah, just quickly, there's another piece from the psychological work that we've already discussed that relates to the question, which is when people feel a sense of safety within this sort of secure base attachment kind of rubric, when people feel a sense of safety and security, then there's greater capacity for tolerance of uncertainty, greater patience, greater willingness to engage in empathy for others. So I think that tracks with experiences of interpersonal conflict. When in moments when we're not feeling safe or we're feeling threatened, we become more defensive. We may be more likely to see the other person through only that sort of limited perspective of the conflict. But when we're in the space of attachment, security, or safety, secure base, we aren't so quickly sucked into only seeing others through the conflict. But there's greater capacity to see others with more complexity, with more dimensionality, that yes, there's conflict, yes, there's something that maybe needs to be addressed, but also there's a patience and empathy and care for the other involved. And again, as we talked, like that's not something that we just get right away. It can happen with more practice and patience.
Thank you, Paul. I just had one other question before we open it up for the Q&A, and it was what's the fundamental human need that your work and that compassion that you feel it addresses?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, which is pretty steeped in Tibetan Buddhist traditions, but I think shared in many other spiritual traditions, what we're really seeking are unconditional qualities and powers of love, compassion, deep groundedness, deep inner peace, deep wisdom supporting all that, from which to then participate in our world with our families, with those close to us, with those we work with those further away, with everything happening in our world. In fact, I think that is the deepest human need, is to learn how to find access to the powers available in the very ground or depth of our being. That would track actually into pretty much all other spiritual traditions that I know about. I just phrased it in a way that they could map right into their own tradition. But I think that actually would be my answer to your question. I think all other human needs are supportive. If we need to fulfill quite a number of other human needs: clothing, shelter, being treated with enough respect that we can find our grounding here in life. But all those needs are, in a sense, supportive needs. The main need is to access the power of the depth of our being in the way that I just suggested. That would be a Tibetan Buddhist kind of answer. I think that would broadly be the kind of answer that would come from virtually any spiritual tradition. That would also be mine.
Cool.
I think it essentially tracks with a lot of different areas in psychology that it's our natural state to be in supportive social connection that draws out these sort of higher qualities of our being, and that when we are in those settings, those social connections, we feel better, our body feels better, things are easier, things are happier. So I think that perspective that John just shared, although it maybe is different from a typical scientific kind of way of thinking about things, it tracks with many of the basic insights from attachment theory and also other areas of social science and neuroscience.
Thank you both. Right, so I'm conscious of time, so I want to make sure that anyone who has questions can have those answered. And we've already got Forrest, so we'll unmute you, Forrest.
So my question to you, John, is I'm new to this, and I'm really finding such value and being the open eyes. If you could be more specific of how to work with that in terms of having my eyes open and not getting distracted by what's out there, as because I feel in conflict between that and then wanting to just be with feelings and let them unwind.
Sure. In the instruction I gave just before this meditation, actually I said your eyes could be open gazing downward or closed if you wish. So I give either option. But in the main tradition that I share from, in Tibetan Nyingma tradition, people often do practice with eyes open. And the way we do that is just, if we had not first learned something called meditation or contemplation, being taught, now close your eyes, as if that's the only way you could do it, I don't think this would even be a question. But because many of us have been, then of course it is a question. But that's just to say that it can be done. I mean, the simple first principle would just be learning not to be focused on any particular thing in your field of vision, but just have a more kind of open panoramic gaze that's not picking out anything in particular. Kind of like when you gaze over, if you're on a hillside or a mountain and you're overlooking a valley, you're not picking out any particular tree. If you're gazing upon the ocean from a beach or a hill, you're not picking out any particular wave. So the gaze can be kind of open like that, not zeroing in on anything. Then your attention can now turn to what's being instructed in the meditation, and you can have a sense in your mind's eye with that field as background. Your visual field is background, fine. The ocean, the valley, it doesn't matter. The wall in my room, the backyard, looking through my window. So fine. That's like the background of, in the receptive mode we just did, field of care. Fine. We can get used to that.
Yeah, I bring 45 years of Vipassana. So for
Yeah.
me, the
Yeah.
meditation means close eyes. And yet to be able to use these practices as I go in my daily life, I get how open eyes is very, very valuable.
That's actually foundational for me, because key to loving, actually becoming a more caring or loving presence, a compassionate presence, and things like that, we need to experience what it's like with our eyes open to see my limiting impressions of the other as just, oh, it's just this impression. What do you look like to me? Whatever you look like. It's very superficial, right? So then maybe you look a little bit like, I don't know, an older sister or something. But then the point is, it's a superficial impression. It's not you. So to see that, to notice how my eyes are mediating that, my perception, and then to sense beneath that and beyond that, or into the fact that there's a mystery here, a depth here, in this other being, you, which completely transcends the superficial impressions. Eyes open is actually critical for that. So I really feel like it could be more than just helpful for people to learn that, to do meditation with eyes open, as we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Forrest. And we have Lynn. Lynn, would you like to come on?
Hello, sorry you guys, I forgot and got up late, so I'm not presentable, but I can talk. My question is this. I am finding, as I heal from a traumatic childhood, that I have this dual thing going on where I will judge someone immediately, very much in the fashion that my mom did, and I'm aware of it. Everyone threatened her. And so I, have this, oh, they're this, or oh, they're that. But what the other thing that's happening, which I think after listening to you guys today might be a sign of healing, is that I'm becoming aware of, I think Paul, you said something about social contact. So they're not sort of empathic, oh, are you okay kind of things that are happening, but rather, I'll just give you an example. I live in an apartment block here, and I park in the alley, and the people next to me got out of their car the other day. And I noticed that this woman had on this incredible sari, this beautiful cotton sari. And I looked up and I said, I love your dress. I don't know her. I'd never met her before. She came over and we started talking about fabric. And I said, oh, it's cotton. She said, it's great in the heat. And I said, oh, it's just beautiful. And I said, I'm a fabricaholic. And then when she left, she said, you made my day. And I thought, oh, it's like providing that little bit of hope or whatever for someone else, even if it's in sort of this seemingly insignificant exchange. And I'll just give you one more example. I was going through McDonald's, getting a coffee, a young guy on the window giving me my order, the drive-through, probably 17 or 18, had an incredible nose. At least I thought he did. So I said to him, I said, can I give you a compliment? He goes, sure. And I said, you've got a great nose. He said, I do. And it was just this, I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Anyway, so.
Thank you, Lynn. I'll share something that in relation to what you shared, that I think is helpful and connects back with several themes that came up today, and how psychology can be helpful in some of these various different frameworks and concepts that relate to our meditative experience. The psychological framework can be really helpful because it shows us how these kinds of voices, like you described your mother's voice coming up and you could sort of hear that. These various psychological frameworks help us to see that these thoughts and experiences that we're having are not necessarily ours. They're not just our own, but they've been conditioned into us by virtue of participating in the world, in various relationships or various cultures or social systems. So we see the thoughts in our head that are conditioned into us through meditation. And as we become more aware of them, and then with the support of practices like the field of care that allow us to become aware of thoughts and feelings in a more gentle way, we're not only becoming a holding environment or a compassionate environment for ourselves, but also for the culture and relationships that we've been conditioned by. So in that way, it's a practice of compassion, not just for ourselves, but also for others. And I think this is a powerful way in which these psychological frameworks like attachment theory and some of the other ones that we describe in the book can help us to see that, that we're becoming compassionate for others as we're doing it for ourselves.
Thanks, Paul. Mark, would you like to come on?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's between a question and what is the result of my practice about compassion. So for me, it's often helpful to think in terms of good for life or not, instead of thinking things are right or wrong. And it's very helpful not to take things too personal for me if anybody says something I do not like. And very helpful. Well, I'm neurodivergent and sometimes I'm struggling with social interaction and people. And for me, it's helpful to remember that this earth protects and supports us. So as we say, Mother Earth. And this connection to nature as our family has personally helped me a lot of times when I've struggled with people and social connections. And evolutionarily, all living things are our family, and they are our ancestors too. So the life that has given us and will give us unconditional love every time. So this wakes a lot of compassion in me, and so I can feel this care, support, and this life is a safe place. And so it's not just thinking as a human, thinking as being part of one nature that's connecting all of us and everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, one kind of field of care is nature. So the meditation practice that we did earlier, that was just one kind of field of care, receptive mode practice, caring moment. But there are other kinds that we introduce people to because different people need a different point of entry. Nature or some part of the natural world that has been experienced as profoundly grounding for you, for the individual, that itself can be the field of care, the field of refuge. And that itself will evoke many of the qualities that are coming from more of the depth of our awareness.
Thanks, John. Amma, would you like to come on? Hope I said your name right.
I pronounce it Amma. And with what Mark said just now about nature, that started me thinking about how, in my experience, I found that certain concepts can be more related to unconditional love than others. Like, for me, it is easy to feel a sense of unconditional love and concern when I think of the concept of cuteness. So for me, being cute is the same thing. It means that you give pleasure to other people by your mere existence. Like, when you're cute, all you have to do is sit around and you make people around you happy. You don't have to do anything. So to me, because that concept has such a strong association with it, when I try to do a receptive meditation like we just did, it is helpful to me to imagine someone calling me adorable, like telling me I'm an adorable little bean. That helps me to get into the, unconditional love frame of mind. It works better to imagine that than to imagine them giving me some other sort of compliment. So I just wanted to add that in as a possible tool that can be used to configure these meditations to make them more effective?
Yeah, there are many ways in, and that's a great observation. But different people will find different kinds of framings associated with different moments in their lives, different experiences, more say efficient to help open up the whole process. Absolutely, it'll be different for different people. So in a sense, our job isn't primarily to try to designate. I mean, it's actually kind of limitless, the different kinds of frameworks and kinds of experience that people have had. But it's also helpful to hear from individuals about the kinds of experience they have and what provides nectar for them. That informs our process, but then we need to, or anyone who shares practices like this needs to provide a kind of a fundamental framework where people can find their own individual way in. That's what we're trying to do.
Hey, do we have time for a couple more? Yeah. Margaret, would you like to come on?
Can you hear me okay? You can. Okay. I meditate, and I meditate mostly on love, peace, truth, compassion, and that gives me a nice experience. I like what you said there, to invoke a past memory, of something loving in my environment or something I received and felt that deep love and acceptance. Sometimes in meditation, I can get a little disappointed if I don't have any experience. And so I would like to know what you would do in that case. I think I can have expectations, and that's not a good idea to have expectations. What I'm aware of also is, and what I'm working on lately, is to be in the present moment and to accept everything as it is. But that is a process for me. Like everything that comes into my environment, not to at all judge it, because I used to judge myself. So I'm saying all that so you'll understand more where I'm at and what I need to do so that I won't be disappointed. I think that's probably a judgment there as well, that I am looking for something and I'm not receiving it, and then I judge it. So I'd love to meet that bridge and be at peace with it.
Paul, do you want to respond, or would you like me to?
Sure. I mean, I think that what we learn within these practices is that any feeling is okay, and that any feeling can be a kind of generative way of engaging the practice. So you mentioned disappointment, and John talked earlier about the idea of allowing space for any feelings to arise and metabolize. And so disappointment is something that we can bring compassionate presence to, noticing that as it's arising and allowing space for the disappointment, rather than trying to do something to manage or control or change the experience, but bringing compassionate attention to that very reaction that you're describing. And then as we do that more and more, we can become more at ease with any feeling, with anger, with fear, with really strong, powerful feelings of bliss. Like there can be a sense that it's all kind of energy and none of it is necessarily overwhelming. And I think, so it sounds to me like that's a potentially good direction of engaging with the practice of disappointment, just gently allowing space for it and allowing it to metabolize itself, and then having some curiosity of what then can happen with it.
Thanks, Paul. So if it's okay with you, Paul and John, for us to go over slightly by a couple more minutes, we have a few more questions in the chat, and we'll just take these two hands raised, if that's okay. Thank you. So Jacob, would you like to come on? And if everyone could just be succinct as possible, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm very happy about the topic that is being prepared this evening. I'm very much happy. My question to you this evening is, how can the same thing be sent to communities? Because especially rural communities, that is where the problems are. Because when it comes to Africans, that is where they normally must feed the children. And so how can we inculcate the same thing into our communities? I'm a community builder. I develop community through sanitation. And so how can I adopt that when I go to communities to the same thing? Thank you very much.
So just to make sure I got the question, it was about, if I understood, it was about connecting the practices for people in rural communities.
That was what I heard,
Yeah.
Paul. Yeah.
I mean, I think this goes back to some of the conversation that we had earlier about really what we're trying to do, what John and I and others who practice and engage this work is trying to work with people to find their own ways in. And as John said, there's limitless ways. And as we engage in practice in various communities and people in their own social locations and contexts take up the practices, it will continue to expand more and more, and people will find their own ways that are most accessible, most workable for them. So there may be certain ways in which, in practicing in an intensive Buddhist community, where very traditional forms of engaging in ritual and refuge are the best way to engage the practice. But then when I go and teach at my university, which is in a rural town in Southern Oregon, there may be different ways that connect with the people in that particular audience. And so when I'm teaching, try to be very attuned and listen to what people's experiences are and get feedback from people as we're engaging in the practice, and allow them to help the community support each other in engaging in the practice. So I think it's very much also driven in that way by the participants in each particular location.
I mean, the only thing I would add is just if you, Jacob, are from a rural community, or you're familiar with rural community people and work with them, just like what Paul said, I would absolutely bet they already are drawing on kinds of fields of care in their own frameworks, from their own backgrounds, like spiritual ancestors, elders, all kinds of things that are common in rural communities, and spiritual backgrounds to those communities. So if you steep in these practices yourself enough, and you begin to catch on to them and see what they can do, you can then, just like Paul said, really listen to people in the community you're working with and see how they map right into their worldview, into what they understand as fields of care, and it becomes theirs.
Thanks, John. Kate, would you like to come on?
Hi, yeah, sorry. I mean, it's really interesting, all the tips and guidance you've been given, and I just wondered, obviously, sometimes we can be very, very activated in our nervous system if something's very upsetting or distressing, or we feel angry, or if someone hasn't treated us with care, and you feel like you've been treated not in a good way, how can you sort of, like, sort of find your equilibrium again and not allow that to take hold, that sort of real feeling of hurt in a way, and your whole nervous system is really activated, and it's sometimes it can completely take over and like affect your sleep, or where you don't feel safe or cared for. So how can you sort of click into the feeling cared for in a way, sort of more readily, I suppose. Yeah.
So the question is, of course, very important, but also I don't think for many of us we can simply click in like that into the sense that we are completely steeped in and grounded in unconditional loving qualities if our nervous system is really, really excited. So there are practical things we need to allow ourselves to find some safety in the environment that we're in, and there are various ways to do that. And there's a section in the first chapter of our book on trauma sensitive ways of beginning to settle down, to get grounded, to establish a kind of secure base in our being, by becoming anchored in the present moment rather than in our reactions to what is going on in our minds. And then from there, then again, I think the book actually does start to address the question you're raising, but it's over a few chapters that we can become more and more, once we find some of our grounding, and that may take time, we can then become more and more familiar with then connecting to a field of care that's actually very effective for us, that carries with it a sense of protection. Or, as Paul was saying, there's another practice related to that of simply learning to become a profoundly kind of healing, holding environment for whatever feelings are now coming up. We couldn't probably do that immediately when completely overwhelmed. But once we become a little more grounded, we can start to do that. And then gradually, as Paul described, we can become actually more and more confident that we can actually be a kind of a loving, healing environment for all the feelings that we're experiencing. But notice the way I'm talking now, my attention is not primarily on some despicable other person who mistreated me. My attention is on my own feelings, which were triggered by my perception of that person and what they may have done. And that's where we have to begin. But once we become a loving, healing environment sufficiently grounded for more and more of our own feelings, our perception of others will begin to open. Even one who I think of as having mistreated me. My perception also will open, at least in my experience, of the ways I have mistreated others. I'll notice more of that. I'll be able to see more because I'm more at home as a healing environment for my own feelings associated with all that. So I can see more in others, see more of how I have been too, not just them. How together we've been caught up, not able to see each other, not grounded, not a healing environment for our own feelings or for each other. See much more of that. And that really becomes compassion. But that's a gradual process of discipline and practice. That is what the book introduces. It's in that direction. That's a good question.
Thanks, John, and I'll link the book in the chat as well as the follow-up email. I think we have one last question and then we'll close. So Julie, you're on, and please be concise.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just reading a question that was in the chat that I'm really interested in. It was by Catriona. She says, how do we bring this care and compassion outwards towards the leaders in the world at this moment who seem to be just doing, a lot of bullying and disregard? Do you have any suggestions for that? Thank you.
Yeah, I could say something real quick and then Paul probably will have something to add to it. By far the most important thing is to learn how to actually become more and more unconditional care, love, compassion, and the wisdom that supports them, to actually become that more and more. That's a process. That's a long process for most of us. But I think we find as we gradually become that more and more, we actually learn how to access those powers of our being with help. If we actually are beginning to learn that, the wisdom that supports that kind of love and compassion starts to help improve our discernment of how to be present, how to respond, where to show up, and in what way to show up. And showing up then as a kind of a presence of unconditional care for all involved. I think that's the direction actually that was followed by figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Thich Nhat Hanh, and of course many others. It's not that they pre-planned how they're going to get control over all the leaders of the world so they'll behave better. I'm not saying you just implied that, but many of us might think that way. It's not that. It's as we gain more of the wisdom and discernment that supports more literally unconditional care, warmth, compassion, and acceptance for all parts of ourself, for all others. That discernment and wisdom that supports all that starts to point out more and more where and when to show up in what way, what to say or not say, how to be present. Yeah, that's that.
Great.
Thank you. Paul, did you have anything to add before we close? And any
No,
last?
I think that's good. I mean, I think that captures essentially what I would say. Our culture and the world events kind of draw our mind into certain ways of thinking and shape our goals and our attention in various ways that might make it hard. And the practice and what John described is sort of shifting our attention, shifting our goal, and that's helping us to embody more unconditional care, more unconditional love, and that then might change. How do we actually embody this, and how does that change how we might show up in the world and relate to others? So might open up new possibilities.
Rachel, one little thing as we close is, could you also put the link for our website into your...
I've just done that, and
message?
I'll share it in the email as well. Yeah, very valuable resource. Yeah. So yeah, I guess it's time to close. We've gone a bit over, so thank you so much everyone for bearing with us. Thank you for everyone who's submitted a question and commented, and thank you so much Paul and John. This has been really for me anyway, a really rich experience, and I'm just very humbled and grateful for everything that you're doing and that you're offering. So thank you so much. Any final words before we say goodbye?
Just really thank you, Rachel. You were a great presence here for us, for me, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. All right, well, take care everyone, and hopefully we'll all see you soon and get practicing. All right, take care. Bye.